Hello again. So we're nearing the end of the book of Ephesians, and as we come close to the end, Paul gets very serious about what the next steps for the Ephesians are. He begins in verse 10 of chapter 6. A final word. Be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on all of God's armor so that you'll be able to stand firm against all strategies of the devil. For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. Now, here in this passage, Paul lays out very clearly what the battle is about. He says the battle that we fight is not flesh and blood. It is a spiritual battle. Now, they were fighting flesh and blood battles. They were struggling to stay alive as a church. They were under persecution. But Paul said, even this, it is not really about the people that you're confronting. It's about what's behind them. It's a spiritual battle, primarily. He then goes on and he says, therefore, put on every piece of God's armor so that you'll be able to resist the enemy in the time of evil. Then after the battle, you'll still be standing firm. And so now he gets into each piece of the armor. Stand your ground, putting on the belt of truth and the body armor, the breastplate of God's righteousness. For shoes, put on the peace that comes from the good news so that you will be fully prepared. In addition to all these, hold up the shield of faith to stop the fiery arrows of the devil. Put on salvation as your helmet and take the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. Paul goes on and he talks about what we're to do. We're going to save that for the sermon on Sunday. But let's look at the armor. I have heard some people say the armor are individual pieces and we're to put them on individually just like a soldier would. I don't think that that is what Paul is trying to convey. When he describes the armor of God, he uses certain terms that are going to remind his Jewish audience, at least, of the Old Testament. Specifically, he talks about the belt of truth. In Isaiah chapter 11 and verse 5, in this passage that talks about the Messiah, Isaiah says, he will wear righteousness like a belt and truth like an undergarment. He will gird his loins with righteousness and truth, the belt of truth. Paul talks about the breastplate of righteousness, and a little bit later, the helmet of salvation. In Isaiah chapter 59, verse 17, again, a messianic prophecy. He put on righteousness as his body armor, his breastplate, and placed the helmet of salvation on his head. The exact terminology that Paul uses. Then later he talks about the sandals of the gospel of peace. Isaiah chapter 52 and verse 7. How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of the messenger who brings good news. The good news of peace and salvation. The gospel of peace, the gospel of salvation. Paul goes on to talk about two other elements of armor that do not come from messianic prophecies in Isaiah. The sword of the Spirit and the shield of faith. Those are things that he adds. But in essence, what he is saying is, put on Jesus. Put on the Messiah. The Messiah has the belt of truth. The Messiah has the breastplate of righteousness. The Messiah wears the helmet of salvation. The Messiah is dressed with sandals of peace. Put on Jesus. That's all we need to remember. Put on Jesus. So what about you today? Have you put on Jesus today? I hope so. Spend some time. Clothe yourself in Jesus before you go out to wage battle today. We'll see you tomorrow.